Hello and welcome to Offend Not, Despise Not, Hinder Not. And while these things apply to everyone, we're focusing specifically on children. This particular series of podcasts, I'm Pastor Jason Robbins from Second Baptist Church in North Stonington with my wife Olga. And this podcast, if you're the kind of person that likes to read or listen to things in chronological order, this would probably fit best between our second and our fourth podcasts. But we are going to be talking today about relational intelligence. Habits are caught and not taught. And so we're going to define that a little bit. We're going to take it apart, and we're going to hopefully make some good practical applications and give some examples. But we'll start, which we've done through each of these podcasts so far, with considering what Jesus has to say on these particular topics. So right now we're going to be looking at the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10. And we're going to specifically be reading verses 25 to 28. And this is sort of the prelude to what we call the parable of the Good Samaritan, but we're just looking at these opening verses in Luke 10, 25 to 28. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" Jesus replied. "How do you read it?" The expert said and answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." And so one of the ways that we want to discuss considering this verse is that our children and the children that we have the privilege of serving in different contexts are also our neighbor. And these words that Jesus is sharing with this expert in the law actually come from the law itself. And this was how Jesus was able to speak to directly what this man was asking. So we're going to go back to the Old Testament, which sometimes we may not think of portraying the Lord in quite as gracious or merciful as manner as Jesus himself portrays. And Jesus was certainly the greatest example of God's desire for relationship with us. But in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 to 9, this is one of the places from the law, from the Old Testament, that Jesus got those words that he shared there in Luke chapter 10. So Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 to 9 says this: "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk alongside the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates." So if you are familiar at all with Orthodox Jewish communities and Jews who are very devout in their faith, they practice these verses very literally. They leave little scrolls, or they place little scrolls on their door frames, and they wear ornamentation with scripture written on them as a very literal application of these verses. But Olga, I've done a lot of introductory talking here, so now I'm going to toss the conversational ball to you and have you give us a little bit of transition from the scripture here and how this applies to relational intelligence, please.
Well, absolutely. There is no greater relational intelligence than to learn how to love our neighbor. And the reason why these two passages go hand in hand is because when we look at these guidelines in the Old Testament, and the Lord reminds us to remember his word, but also if we consider something like the Ten Commandments, right? The Ten Commandments are thou shalt not. And a lot of our parenting, especially with younger children, sound like 10, 20, 40 commandments, right? Like thou shalt not hit your brother, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not, fill in the blank. So in a way, why is it that we do not want the big sister to hit her little brother? Because the bottom line of that all is that we want our children to love one another, and not hitting your brother is actually loving him, right? And so I think that when we look at the Old Testament, where there was a very prescriptive way of what not to do, and the Lord gave the people of Israel this very detailed list of things to not do. And then Jesus comes and he speaks to the people who knew that law. And when the scribe says, well, what shall I do? He's like, well, very simple. Love God. And these are the first 4 commandments, right? Like if we look at the 10 commandments, they have to do with the first few commandments have to do with God saying, I'm the Lord your God. You should honor me. You should love me. You should not make idols. You should keep the Sabbath. You should keep the day to commune with me, and so forth. And then as you continue, it's about you should love the neighbor, honor your mother and your father, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not murder, right? All these things, so if somebody does not know how to love their neighbor well, you could say, well, you could start by not bearing false witness or not lying. In our society, most of us would agree that these are the good things to do. And so when we look at relational intelligence, it's just basically understanding how to be around other people and how to live well in community.
Can I read? I looked up an official definition of relational intelligence.
Sure.
So I'm going to read this, kind of the dictionary definition, and then you can unpack it a little bit for us as to how
Absolutely.
it works. So this is what it says. Relational intelligence refers to the ability to understand and navigate social interactions effectively and build strong, lasting relationships. It encompasses both emotional intelligence, the ability to understand one's own and others' emotions, and the capacity to leverage this understanding in interactions to foster trust, collaboration, and positive outcomes. Ultimately, relational intelligence is about connecting with people, understanding their perspectives, and building meaningful relationships. So this just pretty much sounds something that we all need to grow and develop in. So what does this have to do with, can you maybe break it down a little bit and then tell us what it has to do with creating, what do good habits have to do with relational intelligence?
Okay. Well, a lot of what you just read comes down to love your neighbor as yourself. And we start with ourselves, and in social emotional intelligence, or in social emotional education, it is important to teach a child to know who they are, to understand how they feel, and to start at some point understanding what triggers them sometimes to feel what they feel and how to go about it, right? So this is the part where we need to know how to love ourselves, right? So it is very hard for me to share my favorite toy if it is my only toy, right? Like it is hard. So, but if I know that I have a lot and I love playing with things, and somebody comes and they also might love playing with that, it's kind of like understanding what I like to do helps me as a child feel that maybe sharing is a good thing. But sometimes parents start with sharing is caring, share with your friend. It's starting with the outcome and not let's consider who you are, how you are, right? Understanding self, supporting that, and then saying now you love your neighbor, right? So a lot of that has to do with knowing oneself and then understanding how things make us feel and then going forward towards others. And the habits, so I think that building habits of loving others, and I think that we need to start by saying when we teach a child to love another person, love is not a feeling, love is a habit, right? So someone may be feeling very angry towards their sibling, but feeling angry and hitting are 2 different things. And I think an adult who says, it is okay to feel mad considering what just happened, but you still need to practice having safe hands, AKA do not hit, right? So it's just like affirming that you're a human being with emotions and you are indeed feeling very angry right now, and maybe for a good reason. But let's navigate what would be the habit of practical loving your neighbor. So maybe not hitting, right? Talking about it, maybe walking away, maybe having a conversation about what happened, right? These could be taught as habits, and these are healthy ways of relating to other people that translate into lifelong habits of resolving things, and not just not just saying, well, I really cannot love this person, so I'm just going to avoid them, I'm going to move away, I'll never talk to them again.
So what I'm hearing as you're describing this is in order for us and recognizing that we're all growing in how to do this across the board. But really what you're saying is that we need to be growing in understanding ourselves and our own, the way that we would interact and the way that we do interact. Because if we are not aware of why we're doing many of the things we're doing, we'll have a hard time helping our children to understand the same. And that makes me think about here in Deuteronomy, where Jesus, the Lord, he said in Deuteronomy 6, verse 6, these commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. And then in verse 7, he says, impress them on your children. So there he's making the point that there has to be an ownership on their part. And then from that, they're able to then transmit them to their children. It needs to be a both and in this process, right?
Absolutely. And we need to not underestimate the power of tiny habits. So the tiny habit could be, I noticed that you roll your eyes at your brother or your classmate or at me. And this week, let's work on the habit of not rolling your eyes when you feel upset, right? And then noticing, I noticed you did not roll your eyes at me all week today. Thank you, right? And then we move to the next one. Because sometimes adults use these big, beautiful, abstract words like, let's be respectful here. Well, sometimes with little people, you need to define what that looks like to you, because maybe they feel that they are being respectful. Maybe they could behave a lot worse than they are. And so I think that
most of us as adults feel that way a lot of the time.
Absolutely. So starting small, recognizing who you're working with, defining old terms, and then creating the habits. So for example, I think that peacemaking could be taught as a habit. So let's say if in a family you say, we are not going to go to bed angry with one another. So if something happened, by the time we go to bed, we will all sit down and we'll talk about it, and we'll hear each other out. We'll hear both sides. We will apologize. Maybe we will cry. We will hug, and we will forgive, right? And so establishing these family practices, they're sacred practices, because peace can be taught, and peace can only be taught in a community. I mean, it's important to live in peace with ourselves, but I may feel like a very peaceful person until another person rubs me the wrong way, right? And so just teaching that this can be a habit, that there is a habit of peacemaking. There is a habit of gratitude, right? So when a child says thank you to an adult who made an effort to do something for them, or another friend, that can be taught. And we all like a thankful child, right? So it's a habit, and not just prompting and saying, what do you say? But modeling gratitude, talking aloud about things that we're grateful for. And I love this beautiful American custom of celebrating Thanksgiving. I don't know what other countries in the world have an entire day dedicated to just saying thank you. But I think it is a wonderful practice and a cultural value of gratitude. So teaching gratitude, teaching sorry, teaching how to start a conversation, how to ask good questions to show that you're interested in another person's life. All these things can be taught as habits, and they can be practiced.
So it sounds to me like, because you've used the word taught, but the title of this podcast is Caught, Not Taught. So, and because I know what we're talking about, I see the catching part of it present in what you're talking about. But can you explain how we're not just instructing our children, but we're also enabling them to catch it as well?
Right. So as we apologize to one another as mom and dad, right, we teach the habit of peace or gratitude, right? Or let's just say something very simple like media use. Most adults would agree that we do not want our children to be on screens all the time, right? There is a lot of research that says that it's not great. But if I tell my child to not be on the screen as I'm scrolling down through Facebook, right, I am teaching a habit with my action, which is opposite to what I'm teaching with my words. So kind of like walking the walk and not talking the talk, and not being that hypocrite parent who says, oh, please do as I say, not as I do. It is very important, because children learn way more from what we actually do than from what we tell them to do.
Well, it sounds like also, even when you were talking about things like rolling your eyes or, not resolving something before we go to bed for the evening, that as parents, if we're telling our children not to do those kinds of things, but then they see us do those things without acknowledging it, it does create that hypocrisy and that double standard. And so there are different ways, you just said, right, where we might, if we look back on our parenting, I mean, we all have these, depending on how long we've been parents or, working with children, but the areas in which we might say, do as I say and not as I do. You mentioned one, which is the use of technology, right? Or I think that most of us are tempted to overuse that, or at least use it at inappropriate times. Sometimes something else might be language use, right? Like the things that we want our children to say, and which is good. But if they, in the context in which we put them, they hear it from us or they hear it from other places, it's hard. They're not going to catch the fact they shouldn't do that if they're exposed through us or others.
Or gossip. That's another big one. I feel that if a mom models gossiping or talking about people behind their back in front of your daughters and then expects the daughters not to do so, I mean, we can't expect children to do things that we cannot even do ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, here's another one. How about time spent outdoors, right? Oftentimes, so this is the flip side of the technology.
Yeah,
Oftentimes, we tell our children, get off your tablet and go play outside. But if we as parents, and it doesn't mean, I mean, this, if you have a child, this can be a good thing too. Just go out and, have a sword fight with your son. But it doesn't mean we have to do that necessarily all the time. But if they see us as parents valuing time outside, then they are catching the importance of that, as well as us just telling them to go and do it. And honestly, sometimes we may give them ideas of what they can do when they go outside.
Or do it together. Yeah, there is this wonderful word, co-regulation, like being the co-doer of whatever we do with our children. It's not just like go play outside, but how about we'll go and be outside, right? Mm-hmm. Because it comes down our nervous system frequently when we are tempted to yell or we are so frustrated because of something the child is doing. Chances are we need that little break ourselves. So it's just like, let me go do it with you, because these are good things. I think we're running out of time, but to wrap this up, let's consider, and maybe our listeners on their own can consider some things that they the habits that they caught from the environments that they grew up in, maybe both good and bad. That's a great reflective practice to say, what made me, and what heritage do I pass to my kids, or where can I become intentional to change some things and start anew.
Mm-hmm. So I would definitely say, as you're explaining this, the aspect of relational intelligence, I think that we want everyone to walk away from this with, is that the learning that children do, even though this is counterintuitive to the way that our culture does most learning or promotes most learning, they learn primarily through the relationships that they have with those around them, and not primarily through the instruction that they receive. Would that be a true statement, that relational intelligence means that we have to recognize that we teach our children more through how we interact with them than just instructing them in the things that we say? And I'm going to bring this full circle to say that that's why Jesus came, because he was actually taking what the Father had told us in the Old Testament, and he was coming and making it and living it out with us here. And so he's, again, in anything that we're discussing here, the perfect example of how we can live each of these things in our lives. So recognize that we should, in age appropriateness, but we should hold the same standard for ourselves and for our children. And we should be the primary leaders, not just instructors, in helping them to develop good habits, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your time. And we look forward to sharing the next podcast with you when you have the opportunity. God bless.
God bless.